Hey there! Welcome to a special video in this The Year of the Werewolf. We're not doing a weekly werewolf report necessarily today because I have decided it is time to address an injustice. I have decided that my usual stance of live and let live and allow for peace has come to an end on a certain topic, and we have to talk about it now because this is my channel and I'm going to do what I want. Now, before I get started, I want to assure you, if you don't know me, everything I do is done with a smirk and a wink. Mostly that will be true today. However, there is some very real annoyance buried beneath what I'm about to talk about. So a couple weeks ago, I'm pretty sure it was Bloody Disgusting. It might have been Dread Central, but I was reading through an archived thing on werewolves, and they happened to just offhandedly mention Silver Bullet and equally offhandedly mention that the werewolf looks bad. And okay, let me just start this off by saying loud and proud, because this is something I've been ashamed to say loud and proud a lot in my life. It's something I've always kept quiet about because I'm sick of hearing, oh, but the werewolf looks bad. Silver Bullet is my number one. It is my favorite werewolf movie. And I think that werewolf has been treated badly. And I also think that werewolf has been dismissed because of the opinions of others that people are just picking up. Now, I'm a fan. I'm not delusional. At the end of this video, I will talk about where this werewolf went wrong because it isn't perfect. The point being, this werewolf gets a lot of flack that it doesn't necessarily deserve because, like we don't have some other very goofy looking werewolves in the werewolf genre. And that's the point I'm going to try to make because who's perfect? Who's the perfect werewolf? Silver Bullet most certainly isn't, but I am so tired of constantly. First of all, this is a good movie, but I'm not going to get into that. I don't need you to think it's a great movie for me to think it's a great movie. I was watching this movie. This movie came out in 1985. I was born in 1983. I was watching this movie before I was in school. I probably wasn't watching it when it came out, but I was watching it before I was old enough to go to school. I was a very, very tiny summer when I started watching this movie. So there is something about this movie that is woven into my DNA, and that's personal, and I get it. I think this movie has a fantastic story, but I don't need you to agree with that. If you have qualms about it, fine. But what I want to talk about, and the basic grand theme of this video is, you guys, the werewolf isn't that bad. It doesn't deserve the constant, oh, but the werewolf, oh, but the werewolf, oh, but the werewolf. It doesn't deserve that. So the future version of me that's going to have to edit this and insert lots of pictures that I got off the internet last night is going to be a miserable mess, but we got stuff to talk about. Another disclaimer. I'm going to be doing some comparisons. And I'm going to be comparing this movie mostly with the two biggies. Now, I consider Silver Bullet to be one of the biggies, one of the big werewolf movies that came out in the 80s. But I understand some people don't think that. But An American Werewolf in London and The Howling are certainly the biggies. And I'm going to be doing some comparisons with those movies. And I need you to understand I'm not picking on those movies. I hold these movies with as much reverence as anybody. But some things need to be said. Now, if anybody else, even somebody who claimed to only be a casual werewolf fan, if they said some of the stuff I'm about to say, I would consider it an act of war. So please understand I am saying this with love and frustration at the fact that Mr. Wolfie from Silver Bullet is getting a raw deal that is not deserved. Okay? So let's talk about it. An American Werewolf in London. The effects were created by Rick Baker. Now, we have nothing bad to say about Rick Baker in this house, ever. I love that Rick Baker has a kind of high-key obsession with gorillas. I love that about him. But Rick Baker won the first makeup effects Oscar for his work in An American Werewolf in London. And American Werewolf in London came out in 1981. And the kind of effects that the big transformation scene had never been seen before, especially the part where we're looking at David's face in profile and we see the snout start to come out. So much time was put into that rigging that it deserved an Oscar. And I think that transformation scene is amazing. And hands down, it's amazing. And it deserved all the accolades. But look, we don't get a look at the werewolf after that. There's a slow pan over the legs and kind of up the rib cage so that we see and we hear the breathing of the beast. And there's something amazing about the way they tease not showing the monster too much. And I love the creature effect. I love that they decided to make it a quadruped, which is something Rick Baker was against, which is why, Rick Baker consulted on the creature effects in The Howling. He was actually going to do The Howling until John Landis threw a temper tantrum and dragged him back to An American Werewolf in London. But I like that it's quadrupedal. I like the shaggy nature of the fur. I love the sound. The sound that werewolf makes is amazing. I love the size of it. This fucking thing is enormous. It's not like dog sized or even wolf sized. It's enormous. It's got a broad chest. When it's walking, its legs are out like this. It's incredible. But listen, they told Rick Baker, we're not going to do a lot of close-ups of the beast. We're not going to show it a lot. So you don't have to worry too much about doing a lot of movement on the face or anything like that. So Rick Baker made the face of the monster to be kind of stuck. It's constantly open and there's a tooth thing going on. And there will be pictures put up here throughout. Editing summer note for you. It gives the werewolf a little bit of a derp face. At certain angles, it looks amazing. At certain angles and with certain movements, the thing just looks fucking nuts, and it's amazing. It looks like a crazy monster wolf. But sometimes, in scenes where it's having a more quiet moment, like there's a scene in particular in that adult movie theater where the usher comes up upon it feeding on someone, and it's not having a super active time. It just kind of gives a warning growl to the guy. The way its teeth are, and I don't blame Rick Baker for this. This is a movie maker kind of thing. They fell in love with the way this wolf looked and decided to show it more. And Rick Baker was like, you're not supposed to show that. And with reason, it's a derpy look, you guys. Can't deny it. You can still love it. And I do. I love that wolf. I love everything about it. It's still got a derpy face. Okay. It does. It does. So, I don't know if it's Botine or Botine, but we're going to say Botine because I like that super southern sound. Rob Botine is the guy who did the creature work on The Howling. And in that movie, we also get a long transformation scene. For me, and this is just I don't know shit about FX. I don't know shit about creature effects or anything like that. As a watcher, as an uninformed Luddite, for my money, I like that transformation scene better because of the sound. In An American Werewolf in London, John Landis made a decision to have that first transformation scene, this horrific event, being set off by kind of happy music in the background. Which is funny, I get it, but you don't hear much. In The Howling, in that transformation scene, there's this, it's not even a popping sound, it's a busting sound. You can hear the bones busting apart and reforming, and arguably the werewolf doesn't look as good. I think the werewolves look amazing though. It isn't the same caliber of transformation, especially when we see the snout scene. And they do a scene like that. It is a snout scene, and it's not as carefully put together as what Rick Baker did. There's a stretching of the upper lip that you can tell it's kind of rubber. And I'm not judging. I love, like I said, I like that transformation scene a little better. And I love that there's a scene where you see him growing taller, because the werewolves in this movie are big motherfuckers. They're like 9 or 10 feet tall. Now, that's where I'm going to come and do my first make fun of these werewolves. They're huge. They're hulking. They've got these broad chests, these long arms. They got the big, long monster hands. And they walk on little itty bitty wolf pads. They don't have big feet. They like German shepherds have bigger paws than these things are walking on, and they're bipedal. They don't walk. They're not walking on 4 legs. Like, did I say quadruped for an American Werewolf in London? I don't know. Editing somewhere will fix it. But these guys are bipedal. They're extremely tall, and they're walking on these little itty bitty feet. How? I know we shouldn't be asking for, physics lessons and how things are balanced in a story where people turn into werewolves, but that wouldn't work, you guys. So that's a problem. Second, first of all, I love the way these werewolves look. There's a scene where a werewolf is kind of crouched in the bushes and watching people, and it shows its eyeball kind of rolling around in its socket moving, and it's a disgusting scene, and I love it. It's fabulous. But they look like goats. They just do. They look like monster wolves when you're pulled in real close and you're not seeing, but their ears are really big and they go out like this, and there's just always been something goaty about them to me. They look like big, hairy monster goats. And I'm saying this with love. I love that movie. I love those werewolves. If I could find a bust of one of those werewolves, I would 100% hang it in my house. I love it. The point being, those werewolves aren't perfect. We got the derpy face from an American Werewolf in London, and we've got goat monsters in The Howling. To make the point, the werewolf in Silver Bullet isn't that bad. It is not them, but it isn't that bad. I love this werewolf. I love this werewolf while also acknowledging its flaws, and we will get to it. But first of all, we got to talk about Carlo Rambaldi. Carlo Rambaldi is the man who did the effects for Silver Bullet. Carlo Rambaldi is not Rick Baker, but he is not a nobody. Carlo Rambaldi did E.T. E.T. was his creation. He also did the head mechanism for the first Alien movie, that kind of stuff. That's Carlo Rambaldi. Now, all 3 of these men, Rick Baker, Rob Bottin, and Carlo Rambaldi, all 3 of these men worked on the King Kong movie from 1976, the one that Dino De Laurentiis did. And look, I can talk about that movie, but all 3 of them worked in the makeup department for that movie. All 3 of these men were around and working on things. Carlo Rambaldi did a movie with Lucio Fulci, and Lucio Fulci actually got in trouble for this movie because Carlo Rambaldi's effects were so good that people thought an actual animal was being killed. Like, the effects were so good, people thought they were real. And you can't get past those bragging rights. Like, that's the ultimate bragging right for an effects person, makeup effects. And the point being, he's not a nobody, and he's the person who did the werewolf effects for this movie. Another thing all 3 of these guys have in common is they made these werewolf movies. These 3 in particular. I'm not going to talk about the Wolfman, which the 2010 one that Rick Baker did, which I love. We're talking about these 3. Silver Bullet, The Howling, and American Werewolf in London. These were done under hellish deadlines. Like, the timelines were not enough to build things and craft things to the standards of these makers. They needed more time. They started filming Silver Bullet without a completed creature. And there was a lot of infighting going on. So Stephen King had input in this. The director, I forget, we'll put it below. The director had input, and Dino De Laurentiis had input. And there was a lot of infighting about what the werewolf should look like. And Stephen King was very adamant. He wanted a low-key werewolf. He wanted it to be almost plain. And knowing that, the way it looks kind of makes a little more sense. But Dino De Laurentiis had his input. They had originally hired a dancer to walk around in the costume because they wanted someone who was hyper aware of how their body moves, hyper aware of the way they look in certain positions. And Dino De Laurentiis hated it, insulted the hell out of this performer, and they ended up doing a lot of the scenes with actually Everett McGill doing the costuming. So a lot of these scenes that you see, that's Everett McGill in there. And I want to talk about why I think some people might feel a little underwhelmed by this werewolf. Carlo Rambaldi he's amazing, and he deserves accolades, and he also doesn't deserve this disrespect. Doesn't deserve it. So let's think about An American Werewolf in London and The Howling. Those transformation scenes are kind of long. Like it's an exhibition that you're watching. It is a brag of what these FX wizards are capable of. We don't get that in Silver Bullet. The one full transformation scene that we watch happen, it happens in the garage while the sheriff watches on in horror. It's very fast. It isn't supposed to be a drawn out, hey, look at all the rigs that we made of the body transforming. It's very fast. And I think that lines up with the whole low-key monster thing. We want this to be something else. Now, I think the transformation scene is amazing. Like, really watch it. If you watch this movie, really watch it. Really watch that face turning. There's a scene where, you see his brow bulging and you see his jaw starting to jut out. Not quite a snout yet, but his jaw starting to come out. And Everett McGill in the makeup is rolling his eye around, and it's a fantastic look. It's a great effect. And they just don't show us a lot, which might be a problem why it's underwhelming. I don't think it's underwhelming. I like they don't show us a lot. And also the werewolf is treated differently in this movie than it is the other two movies. This werewolf is treated very much like a serial killer. And I promise I'm going to try to stay away from the content of the movie and to try to stay on just the werewolf. But it's a good movie. But we don't get the long transformation scene, and we don't get a lot of looks at this werewolf. We see a lot of the werewolf is moving behind trees, the werewolf is in shadow, and we get a lot of point of view of the werewolf, which is completely different. We don't see a lot of that in these movies. And it's different. They went for something different. And again, making it more like a serial killer than an animal, a person who has transformed and gone into an animalistic rage. There's something more calculating about this werewolf. Oh, you know what? I've got to come back to this. I just saw it. I have notes here to try to keep me organized. It's not working, you guys. I'm very sorry. Let's go back to The Howling for a second. So I talked about the werewolves being these huge hulking things walking on little itty bitty feet. They basically look like they're walking on table legs. And the big ears. We've also got to talk about the Karen werewolf at the end. Am I the only one that thinks she turned into a giant Pomeranian on the 10 o'clock news? We're just going to look over that one. She turned into a big Pomeranian and her little nose is bouncing like a bunny's, and then they shoot her. Now, I love that movie. I love Joe Dante. But come on. We're going to pick on the Silver Bullet werewolf while there's a big Pomeranian sitting right there just waiting for us to make fun of it. Come on, you guys. Okay. Knowing all of that, are you really going to pick on this werewolf? All right. So the biggest one is that this werewolf looks like a bear. It's fair. It's fair. But, I mean, if you really watch it, like, okay, I've got all these pictures of the werewolf. It doesn't look like a typical werewolf. They did, make the head really big because it moves a lot. I'm going to insert something here. Right now is the time of we're going to insert something. Did you see it? How can you be mad at a werewolf whose face moves like that? It hissed at them. Its whole snarly, come on. How are you mad at that? Give me a break. That looks wonderful. That looks great. That scene of that werewolf kicking down it kicked down the whole side of the house to come in and attack these people. And then you get that close up of, it's amazing. That is a great, great effect. Okay. And before I get to the parts of the werewolf that I do understand, there are problems, and I will talk about them because, again, I'm a fan and I'm sick of the mistreatment, but I'm not delusional. There are problems, and we'll get to it. But let's talk about some other werewolves in movies that are fantastic, by the way, that we're really going to pick on the silver bullet werewolf when these are out there, like Ginger Snaps. You know I love this movie. I adore this movie. This movie knocked my socks off the first time I saw it, and I watch it at least once a year. It's one of those that I watch all the time. I'm obsessed with this movie. I love it. But that werewolf is goofy looking. Okay? It just is. It doesn't change the fact that the movie is amazing. It doesn't change the fact that the monster presence isn't still amazing. It doesn't, that ending being so heartbreaking, it doesn't change any of that. And I love that werewolf. But I don't hear anybody talking about it as much as I hear people talking about the problems with the silver bullet werewolf. And it's got to be said, because why are you picking on Carlo Rambaldi's werewolf and not saying anything about that one? Lower budget, yes, I get it. And I've always got a ton of grace for that kind of stuff. But come on. Another one we got to talk about is the werewolf from that Wes Craven movie, Cursed. I didn't love this movie. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. It never makes it onto my list because I'm just kind of, I should probably rewatch it because I love Christina Ricci, but I'm always just kind of left a little cold about this. And the werewolf looks like a costume you bought at Spirit Halloween. It just does. That doesn't look good. That doesn't look innovative. It's barely articulating in the face. No. And you're going to pick on the silver bullet werewolf? Another one I've got. Oh God, this movie's so good. And I'm only going to bring this one up because if I weren't talking about werewolves right now, if I showed you this picture, you probably wouldn't know that that's a werewolf. They went for something really different. And that's the werewolf from the movie Late Phases. And oh God, that's a good movie. But that creature design, they went for something completely different. They didn't follow tradition with werewolves, as it were, with the design of that creature. And in action, that thing's freaky looking. But when we're talking about werewolves, you look at that and you go, oh, that's not a werewolf. If I weren't talking about werewolves like that, you'd look at that and be like, gremlin? Maybe? Spooky house monster? What is that? It's a werewolf. And the fourth one. This is the fourth one we got to talk about. This guy. Come on, I had to bring him up. I love that movie too, by the way. But come on. I need people to stop mistreating this movie and stop with that offhanded comment. Oh, it's an okay movie, but that werewolf. I just gave you tons of examples where you can say the same thing and you never do. Now, having said all that, I'm going to cool my jets. I'm going to take a drink. I'm going to calm the hell down. And we're going to talk about why this werewolf has issues. The first being the color. This costume was made out of bear hair. And they made a decision to make a brown werewolf. And up to this point, in color at least, we didn't see a whole lot of brown werewolves. And it's a solid color. A lot of the werewolves that we see, and I want to point to An American Werewolf in London precisely for this, is they tend to have mottled coats. It's not one solid color. It's got lots of different colors. And there were older movies that did this too, where there was one movie, is it called Cry Wolf? I can't remember. It's an old movie where the werewolf totally looks like a Yorkshire Terrier, but they gave it different stripes of color through its face. And I like that attention to detail. This wolf being brown and being just that one solid color, they went for something different. And again, I realize that. I like it. And in later years with werewolves, they experimented more with either different colors of werewolves or lining up the color of the werewolf with what color the person's hair was. So, they did it in The Howling a little bit. Karen's Pomeranian werewolf is blonde because she's a blonde woman. But they didn't do it with any of the werewolves at the colony. That's what they call it in that movie. They all just look the same. But I don't love the bear hair. And it doesn't help in the argument against the werewolf not looking like a bear, because it looks like a bear. It does. That's because of the fur. Another thing that I think is a problem with this, and the other two I'm making a point to talk about, the werewolf bodies, and even on An American Werewolf in London, it's on all fours, but you can still see that thing got jacked. It's big, it's broad. David Naughton, the actor who plays David Kessler, is not a particularly big man. He's very average sized, very medium sized. But the werewolf is huge. And in The Howling, those werewolves, not only are they really tall, they're broad, they're enormous. And in this movie, we've got this gigantic head, which again, I'm sure is because it needed all the controls inside for the articulation, because it is a very movable face. They didn't make a body to match it. So the head is really big compared to the body. And let's assume we're always looking at Everett McGill. Everett McGill is a tall man, but he's a lanky man. He's tall and just not very broad. And although they did do a little bit of padding in the werewolf body part, it's not a lot. It's not hulking. And in the final fight scene where Gary Busey is going toe-to-toe with the werewolf, they made it look like the werewolf is quite a bit taller than Gary Busey, but it's still not big. And what we have is this big head and these little narrow shoulders, and it just doesn't look very monster-like, and I think that's a problem. And it does kind of add to despite, this werewolf's got great big wolf ears. It doesn't have little round teddy bear ears, but it does add to the whole bear look, and Another problem with this is if you watch this movie enough, and I have, there's a big inconsistency with the face as it moves, as it is menacing and looking at us. And they like to do close-ups of certain parts of the face. They don't have a whole lot of shots of the moneymaker face, the monster face that moves. They'll do a lot of close-ups of just the eyes. They'll do a lot of close-ups of just the mouth. And there's a big inconsistency there, because when they do the close-ups of just the eyes, it's super fuzzy around there. And if you look at the werewolf, the head as it is, it's not. There's a lot of places where you see like grayish brown skin poking through the fur, because there's not a lot of fur growing in certain places on this, which is a neat touch, I think. But on the close-ups, it's super fuzzy, and it's like, that's not the same guy. What? Is that a stand-in werewolf? What are we doing? And when they do the close-ups of the face, and it's usually, open mouth, saliva dripping off the fangs, it's so obviously rubber. And inconsistent, because the mouth on the actor, the one that's moving, is great looking mouth, great looking, like, it looks great. Those inconsistencies do tend to bother. Another problem is, I already talked about tall but not monster big, like that's an issue. Another problem are the appendages. Now they show a scene, and it's a great scene as it's shot, where the werewolf is walking across the bridge menacingly coming towards Marty, and it's doing this with its hands, it's itching to get in there and tear this kid apart. They didn't put a lot of work into making the hands really monstery. They put fur and makeup on the hands and then claws, but in The Howling, they got those really long crazy fingers and long, so when they do this, it's an effect just watching them wiggle their fingers. And in this one, they're still just kind of regular man sized, and we missed an opportunity to go like freaky monster there. And again, I get it, they wanted low key, they wanted plain, but I got a problem with the hands. Another thing they did, I made fun of the Howling werewolf's feet. I'm going to make fun of this guy's feet. They're just feet. They just, again, put fur and little claws at the end. They're just feet. We missed an opportunity to go crazy there. And I do get it. I do get it. But I shouldn't have to break all of this down. I believe it is unfair. As someone who, this is my favorite werewolf movie, let me just say, I found lots of people who have big love for this movie, which made me happy. DeviantArt is full of wonderful depictions of this werewolf. And, just in case, I'm pretty sure I've got some leftover pictures of the werewolf. Like, okay, there's one I have to show you because it made me laugh. There's this one picture that looks like it was taken on a trip to a really fucked up Chuck E. Cheese. I mean, I found lots of really weird pictures of the werewolf in this because this werewolf was a big deal. Despite all of the nitpicking coming from Dino De Laurentiis and Stephen King and the director trying to hold their ground for what their vision needed to be, this werewolf, I think, turned out pretty good. It's not perfect. I don't even pretend that it's perfect, but I love this werewolf. And I cannot take reading another article where this movie is dismissed because the werewolf isn't perfect, because there are lots of movies that don't have perfect werewolves that are amazing movies that it's not brought up. And again, I told you I would try to stay away from talking about the content of this movie, but this movie is good. I understand there are cheese factors to every Stephen King movie. Don't even start. But this is a good movie. And this is, of the three that I talked about, this is a violent movie. There are awful, awful depictions of violence depicted in this movie, which is what you're supposed to want in a monster movie where people are being torn to pieces. The one that they didn't show was because it happened to a child. A child was torn to pieces, but we get to watch his father's horrified reaction to seeing his child torn to pieces. And why is it every time I record, my eye gets attacked by an eyelash? This movie doesn't deserve it. This movie does not deserve But the Werewolf. It needs to stop. Please stop it. Please treat this movie fairly. I don't expect you to love it. I understand that there are problems. I understand that, if you think Gary Busey is the best part of this movie, look, you're not wrong. Gary Busey is the best part of this movie. But that doesn't mean there aren't other amazing parts of this movie. Terry O'Quinn as the sheriff in this is incredible. Megan Follows is great in this. Corey Haim is great in this. Come on, it's a good movie. And look, I'll leave that alone. But the werewolf. The werewolf is not perfect, but it does not deserve all this derision that it keeps getting. That's all I wanted to say. So this is one of the longer videos. I know I've gone on a rant, but I love werewolves. And they're like my holy trinity. And this one has always been, Silver Bullet in particular, it's always been looked down upon. It's always been not treated with the same reverence. And maybe it doesn't deserve the same reverence, especially as an American Werewolf in London, because of the work that went into that transformation scene, which we don't get in Silver Bullet. It's a very short one, like I said. But that werewolf still looks good. It still works well. The movement in the face alone, and the de-transformation scene in the end. I didn't record any of this, but that de-transformation scene is amazing. You watch the hair getting sucked back into the skin. You watch the ears kind of curling back down and turning into human ears. It's a good creature effect. It's a good monster movie. And I've said my piece. I've said my piece and I've made it clear because I've spent years trying to be patient with people's tastes, trying to be, okay, everybody can think what they want to think. But I think this has gotten to the point where it's unfair. And I've said what I needed to say. I won't bring it up again. Next week I will come back talking about books and new movies. And hopefully I'll find some fun stuff. But just know I spent a long time not openly admitting Silver Bullet is my favorite werewolf movie because I didn't want to hear it. Or just going, well, I like it. I like that movie. And getting shit for it. I'm done. This is my favorite werewolf movie. Don't come at me with how this werewolf looks, because as a werewolf lover, I've got a list of other werewolves that are goofy looking. So you've been warned. I want to thank you so much for putting up with this, honestly, for always being here, always commenting, and always recommending. And that'll be it for me. I promise I'll be in better humor next week. Thank you again. Bye.